That's a quote from the UN Secretary General in the wake of the IPCC's unequivocal latest report. It concluded with virtual certainty that in almost every region of the world, hot extremes have become more frequent and intense since the 1950s. What are the consequences of that? An extreme heat event that we would have expected once every 10 years or so in the 19th century now occurs roughly 2.8 times a decade, and it's 1.2 degrees hotter than back then. If the world warms by 1.5 degrees, expect that extreme heat event more than 4 times a decade and nearly 2 degrees hotter. 2 degrees of warming sees those events occur more than 5 times a decade, and 4 degrees of warming, which is unlikely to occur this century, would see formerly once a decade events occur almost annually. What the world does in the next decade is critical to determining what happens next. The broad global agreement is to get to net zero emissions. Just how quickly and how exactly it will get there remains the messy detail. Getting the world moving in a coordinated way is the challenge for COP26.
20 countries equal 80% of all the emissions. So we need those 20 countries to do as much as possible, as fast as possible.
The biggest emitter is China, a country with a massive population that one research group estimates produces more than a quarter of the world's emissions. Rhodium estimates China now emits more carbon dioxide than every OECD nation combined. China's president says the country will strive to peak its carbon emissions by 2030 and reach net zero by 2060.
China will step up support for other developing countries in developing green and low-carbon energy, and will not build new coal-fired power projects abroad.
That's not a phasing out of coal-fired power domestically though, and Greenpeace says China approved 24 coal-fired power plants in the first half of this year. And China's goals are not as ambitious as many other countries. Here's what the UK Energy Transitions Commission chairman said.
A simple mathematical fact that if China does not peak emissions until 2030, I do not think we have anything like a 50-50 chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade.
But China argues that developed countries, which have been producing far more greenhouse gases for longer, develop their economies thanks to fossil fuels and should contribute more to decarbonisation. More than a decade ago, developed countries did pledge $100 billion a year in climate finance to help developing countries transition.
Now, the developed world so far has not delivered on that promise, and that has led to two things, one of which is a breakdown in trust, and kind of essentially those two camps. But also, there are countries, the more authoritarian regimes, who want to kind of take apart the, international rules-based system. It's given them an excuse. So I think it is really important that we stop providing that excuse to them.
Top among those developed countries is the United States, the second biggest emitter right now and the biggest contributor to emissions since the Industrial Revolution.
I think the measurement of success in Glasgow will be the total picture of countries stepping up and raising ambition across the board.
The US has done the hokey pokey with the Paris Agreement, leaving under Trump, returning to the table under Biden. And the current administration wants to see US emissions reach net zero by 2050, plus interim targets on the way there.
The United States is committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions between 50 and 52% below 2005 levels by the year 2030. And we set a goal that by 2025, our power sector will be free of carbon.
Now, targets are one thing, but is the US on a course to actually get there? This is America's annual emissions. They peaked about 2005. And here is what the 2030 target looks like. But it's not clear that they're on track to achieve that yet. This analysis from Climate Action Tracker suggests the current policies of the US have the nation falling well short. That gap between ambition and reality is what some of the smallest emitters in the world, who face some of the most immediate existential threats, want action on. The world's low-lying tropical islands are desperately calling for more than empty words.
Climate change remains the greatest threat to the security and well-being of our region, especially to low-lying atoll nations like my own, which simply have no higher ground to seek.
While the nation of Grenada, already feeling the effects of climate change, wants financial aid to help it adapt.
It's difficult for us as farmers now to cope. We cannot really plan because we don't know when is the rainy season, when is the dry season now, simply because climate has changed.
I want more for my children than just to survive. I want more for my people. I want more for myself than just to survive. We need to be able to thrive.
In a world where the Earth could be just 10 years from heating by more than 1.5 degrees, as concluded by the IPCC, 2050 is a long way off.
Without decisive action, we are gambling away our last chance to literally turn the tide. We need to end the war on our planet and ensure a green and resilient recovery.
And if the world leaves it to the middle of the century to make deep cuts to carbon emissions, well, that's probably leaving it too late.